If I had to start learning English from zero, I wouldn't begin with grammar or writing. I would begin with listening and speaking, because language is sound before it is structure. It's feeling before it is formula. And if you want to speak naturally, you must hear naturally first. Think about how children learn. They listen to their parents, their siblings, the world around them. For months, sometimes over a year, they don't say anything, but their brains are recording everything. Every rhythm, every tone, every pattern of speech is stored inside them. And one day, without warning, they open their mouths and words start to come out. Not perfect words, not textbook grammar, but real, living language. That's not a miracle. That's how the human brain is wired to learn. If I started from zero, I would make listening my foundation. I'd listen to English every day, even if I didn't understand most of it at first. I'd choose short, clear, real speech, stories, cartoons, children's shows, or simple YouTube channels where people speak slowly and clearly. I'd use headphones, close my eyes, and just feel the sounds. I wouldn't panic if I missed the meaning. I'd trust that over time, the patterns would start to stick. Alongside listening, I'd practice speaking right away, not after months of study. Now, I'd repeat phrases I heard. I'd talk to myself. I'd practice out loud, even alone in a room. Why? Because your mouth is a muscle. Just like learning to dance or play an instrument, you need to train your tongue, your lips, your jaw to move in new ways. The earlier you start speaking, even imperfectly, the faster your confidence will grow. And I wouldn't wait to understand everything before I speak. That's a trap. Perfectionism kills progress. The point isn't to sound like a native speaker on day one. The point is to start communicating no matter how simple your words are. I like coffee. This is my pen. I am learning English. These are not childish sentences. They are stepping stones. Every fluent speaker you admire once started with these same building blocks. Listening and speaking are the roots of real language. Writing and grammar come later. They're the leaves and branches. But if the roots are weak, the tree can't grow strong. So if I had to start again from zero, I would plant my roots deep in sound, speech, and rhythm. I would make English something I hear and feel, not just something I study. Because when you build your foundation this way, fluency is not a distant dream. It becomes a living part of who you are. I would learn like a child, starting with sounds, not rules. You see, children don't sit down with grammar books to learn their first language. They don't ask, is this the present continuous tense? Or should I use an article here? No, they imitate. They observe, they listen, then they speak. And they are not afraid to make mistakes. In fact, they expect to. That's part of the learning process. They say words the wrong way. They mix up tenses. They pronounce things strangely. But every time they try, their brain learns something new. And because they're not ashamed of getting it wrong, they get better, faster. If I started from zero, I would copy this exact method. I would stop treating English like a subject and start treating it like a skill. Think of how someone learns to dance. They watch, then they copy. They don't ask, what's the rule for foot placement? They just move, then they adjust, then they improve. English is no different. So instead of worrying about grammar first, I'd focus on imitation. I'd listen to how native speakers talk, how they pause, how they emphasize, how their voices rise and fall, and I'd try to copy that. Not just the words, but the music of the language. I'd repeat short phrases, mimic conversations, and practice aloud, not silently in my head. And I wouldn't rush into writing essays or memorizing verb charts. That can come later. I'd build a relationship with the language first. I'd let it enter my ears, sit in my mouth, and become familiar. Because rules don't make you fluent. Repetition and rhythm do. So I'd return to that childlike mindset, curious, fearless, open, willing to say apple 100 times, if that's what it takes, willing to be laughed at, to laugh at myself, and to keep going. Because fluency doesn't come from studying harder. It comes from learning smarter. By returning to how we were all born to learn, through listening, repeating, and playing with the language like a child discovering it for the first time. I would use my environment to learn, turning everything around me into a tool for English. If I were starting from zero, I wouldn't wait for a perfect classroom or an expensive course. I would begin right where I am, with what I have. Language is everywhere. It's on your phone, on your walls, in the objects you use every day. I would change the language settings on my phone to English. That way, every time I check the time, open an app, or send a message, I'm learning. I would start labeling things around my house: door, mirror, cup, window. Every time I walk by, I'd read the label out loud. Those little moments build vocabulary faster than you realize, because now the word is connected to something real, something I can see and touch. I would also take advantage of technology. If I'm watching a video or reading a short article, I'd pause and repeat the parts I like. I'd imitate the speaker's tone or read the sentence aloud to myself. I'd use apps, yes, but not just to learn. I'd use them to live in English. Voice messages, subtitled videos, songs, weather reports, even the instructions on my microwave. If I can find them in English, I'd use them. The goal is not to study English once a day. The goal is to make it a part of my daily life, to breathe it, to hear it, to see it all around me. And I'd make learning part of my routine, not a separate task. While brushing my teeth, I might repeat the word toothbrush. While making tea, I'd say, I'm boiling water. While walking, I'd name things I see: tree, car, sky, child. The world becomes my classroom. Because the truth is, fluency isn't built in classrooms. It's built in moments. Tiny, repeated, intentional moments throughout your day. That's how I'd learn English from zero. Not by escaping my life, but by turning my life into English. I would speak out loud every single day, even if no one was listening. Most learners wait too long to speak. They think, I'll start talking when I know more vocabulary, or I don't want to sound foolish. But that delay becomes a habit. And the longer you stay silent, the harder it becomes to find your voice. If I started from zero, I wouldn't wait for confidence. I would create it. How? By speaking out loud every day, to myself, to the mirror, to the empty room. I describe what I'm doing. I'm making breakfast. I am cutting bread. The tea is hot. These simple sentences may seem small, but they are powerful. Because every time I speak, my brain connects thought to language. Every time I say something aloud, I train my mouth to move the English way. Speaking is a physical skill. Just like learning to swim or drive, it gets easier with repetition. The more you use your voice, the less awkward it feels. The more you practice forming sounds, the more naturally they come. You don't need a teacher or a partner to begin, you only need yourself. And I would record my voice, even if I didn't like how it sounded. Then I'd listen, not to judge, but to improve. I'd ask, did I pronounce that clearly? Can I say it smoother next time? I'd celebrate even the small wins. A new word I used correctly, a sentence that felt more natural. Speaking out loud isn't just practice, it's progress. When we speak, even imperfectly, we tell our brain, this is real, this matters. I'm using what I've learned. And that message is what turns passive knowledge into active fluency. I would make mistakes on purpose and learn from everyone. If I were starting English from zero, I would not try to avoid mistakes. In fact, I'd welcome them. I'd see each one as a teacher in disguise, because the fear of being wrong is the biggest enemy of progress. And yet, that's what holds so many learners back. They hesitate, they second guess, they stay quiet, not because they don't know, but because they don't want to be embarrassed. But here's the truth. No one ever became fluent without making hundreds, thousands of mistakes. Every error is evidence that you're trying, that you're stretching beyond what's comfortable, and that's exactly where learning happens. If I said something wrong, I wouldn't apologize. I'd smile, I'd repeat it, try it again, or ask for the correct way. If someone corrected me, I wouldn't feel shame. I'd feel grateful, because now I know better. Think about how babies learn. They mispronounce words for years. They say goad instead of went. They say mouses instead of mice. And still, no one stops them. Why? Because we know that mistakes are not a sign of failure. They're a sign of growth. So I would let myself speak with broken sentences. I would try new words, even if I wasn't sure. I would laugh at the moments when I said something silly and then repeat it correctly. I would turn my mistakes into practice opportunities. Because when you treat mistakes like stepping stones, you remove fear from learning. And without fear, progress moves faster. You become bold, curious, flexible. You ask questions. You take risks. You use the language instead of just studying it. And slowly, those mistakes begin to disappear. Not because you never make them, but because you're constantly learning from them. And one day, you'll look back and realize that all those embarrassing moments were actually building blocks. They shaped your fluency. They strengthened your voice. So if I were starting again, I'd give myself permission to stumble. Because the ones who grow fastest are the ones who are brave enough to get it wrong. I would listen more than I speak, because listening builds the foundation for fluent speaking. If I were starting English from zero, I would train my ears before anything else. Just like a baby spends months listening to voices before ever saying mama or papa, I would soak in the sounds of English long before I expect myself to speak it well. Because listening isn't just passive, it's powerful. It's how you learn rhythm, tone, emotion, pronunciation, even grammar, without needing to study a single rule. I'd listen to conversations, even if I didn't understand every word. I'd let the language wash over me. I'd begin to recognize patterns, how sentences begin, how questions rise in tone, how feelings are expressed with just a sigh or a pause. My brain would start connecting meaning to sound naturally, quietly, just by hearing it again and again. And I'd listen with curiosity, not pressure. I wouldn't worry about understanding everything. I'd focus on catching one word, one phrase, one idea, and that would be a victory. Over time, those small victories would add up until full sentences became clear and entire stories made sense. I'd listen to slow English podcasts, YouTube channels for learners, or even children's books read aloud. I'd turn on English subtitles while watching simple shows. I'd repeat what I heard out loud, copying the speaker's rhythm. That's how fluency forms, from repetition that feels natural, not forced. Because every fluent speaker was once a great listener. Listening builds vocabulary without memorizing. It improves pronunciation without drills. It helps you feel the language, not just translate it. So I would give my ears a daily workout. 10 minutes a day, 20 if I could. Just focused, intentional listening, no multitasking. Just me, the voice, and the language. Because fluency doesn't begin with speaking, it begins with hearing. When you listen often, you don't just hear words, you hear meaning, you hear music, and eventually those sounds become your own voice, clearer, smoother, and more confident than you ever imagined. I would read out loud every single day, even just a little, because reading aloud connects the eyes, the brain, and the mouth. If I were starting English from zero, I wouldn't just read silently. I would speak the words I read. I'd make my voice a part of the learning process. Even if I didn't understand every sentence, I would say it. Because when you read out loud, something powerful happens. Your eyes see the words, your brain processes their meaning, and your mouth practices the rhythm and flow of English. It's like three parts of you working together, and that creates stronger memory. I'd begin with simple material. Children's books, short news stories written for learners, dialogues from English learning websites. I'd read slowly, clearly, and with feeling. I'd pay attention to punctuation. I'd pause at commas, drop my voice at full stops, and rise in tone when I see a question mark. These little things teach you how English feels when spoken. If I came across a word I didn't know how to pronounce, I'd look it up, listen to the sound, and try it again. If I stumbled over a sentence, I'd go back and read it one more time. Not for perfection, but for comfort, for familiarity. Because the more I say it, the more natural it becomes. And here's the beautiful part. When you read out loud consistently, your speaking becomes smoother, your vocabulary becomes active, not just something you recognize, but something you use. You stop translating in your head and start thinking directly in English. Even 5 minutes a day can make a huge difference. 5 minutes where your mouth practices fluency, your ears hear your progress, and your mind grows stronger. That's how habits are built. That's how confidence grows. Because in the end, it's not just about reading English, it's about owning it, feeling it in your voice, hearing it with your ears, and little by little, turning the language from something you study into something you live. I would learn the phrases, not just the words, because real English lives in combinations, not in single pieces. If I were starting English from zero, I wouldn't spend all my time memorizing long vocabulary lists. I wouldn't try to learn 100 words a day. Instead, I'd focus on phrases, small, natural expressions that real people use in real situations. Because when you learn phrases, you learn how English is spoken, not just what each word means. Think about it. In everyday life, we rarely speak in isolated words. We say things like, "How's it going?" "I'll get back to you," or "That makes sense." These short expressions carry feeling, tone, and context. And if you know even a handful of these, you can sound more fluent, even with a small vocabulary. If I were starting over, I'd choose 5 useful phrases and practice using them in different ways. I'd say them aloud in front of the mirror. I'd write my own little dialogues using them. I'd listen for them in podcasts and TV shows and celebrate when I heard them used by native speakers. Because when you use whole phrases, your brain doesn't have to build every sentence from scratch. You already have ready-made tools in your pocket. It reduces the pressure. It boosts confidence. And it helps you sound natural. And the best part, phrases stick. They're easier to remember than single words because they have rhythm and context. For example, "I don't feel like it" is easier to remember than just the word feel. Why? Because you've heard it used in a situation that makes sense. It means something to you. So I'd collect phrases like a traveler collects souvenirs. Not just big, fancy ones, but small, useful, everyday expressions. The kind that open doors in conversations. The kind that make people say, "Wow, your English sounds real." Because fluency isn't about knowing every word in the dictionary. It's about knowing how to say the right thing at the right moment. And learning phrases is the fastest way to get there. I would speak even when I'm not ready, because waiting for perfection means waiting forever. If I were starting from zero, I would not wait until I had enough words or perfect grammar to start speaking. I would begin speaking as soon as possible, even if all I could say were simple things like, "My name is," or "I like tea." Because the truth is, fluency doesn't come after you learn. It comes through speaking. Too many learners stay silent out of fear. They want to speak, but they wait until they feel ready. And that moment never comes. So they keep learning passively, building knowledge, but never turning it into skill. But language is not just knowledge, it's a muscle. And like any muscle, it only gets stronger with use. You can study swimming for years, but you won't learn to swim until you get in the water. It's the same with English. Speaking is the water. If I didn't have someone to talk to, I'd talk to myself, out loud. I'd describe what I'm doing. I'm brushing my teeth. I'm going to the store. I'd ask myself questions. What do I want to eat? And answer, maybe some rice. I'd use English in everyday moments, even if no one else heard me. And when I did speak with others, I wouldn't worry about mistakes. I'd focus on connection, not perfection. I'd listen, respond, laugh, and learn. I'd remind myself that speaking isn't a test. It's a tool for life. Because the moment you speak even one word, you're no longer a learner. You're a user of the language, and each time you speak, you build courage. You build fluency. You become the English speaker you once dreamed of being. So I wouldn't wait. I'd start small, I'd speak often, and I'd let my voice grow stronger with every word I say.